consider myself not an expert, but somewhat knowledgeable on American history and particularly foreign policy, our foreign policy history. I had no idea that the Democrats had essentially what you're saying had snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, if you will, and that we actually could today have a very similar situation in Vietnam that we have in the Koreas, where you have a dictatorship, a communist dictatorship in the north, but you've got a thriving democracy, economically booming South Korea. You're saying we could have had that in Vietnam.
Well, and at the time in question, South Korea was not a free country either. They were under a military dictatorship. South Vietnam was doing significantly better than that on the whole. Taiwan was still a one-party state in that era, but because South Korea and Taiwan had enough space to be able to develop and not just economically but also politically, those became thriving democracies. And South Vietnam was well on the way too. Cambodia was on the way. Laos a little further behind, but still, these could be nice countries. And instead, we had a communist bloodbath. Millions died at the hand of the new communist masters in each of those countries, so much so that in Cambodia, between a quarter and a third of the entire population was murdered in
Mm,
less than 3 years by their
frightening.
communist leadership. It's just nothing like it in the history of the world. And the pathetic thing is that the American left still denies this. They still talk about Ho Chi Minh as the George Washington of Vietnam. They kind of quit talking about Pol Pot as the George Washington of Cambodia after his massacre became clear. But these are just huge blind spots for Democrats in this country. And you have to seek out the truth because they won't tell you. You're not going to hear it on the news for sure. You just saw there was a poll out, I think, today that said that Pete Hegseth's coverage has been 100% negative in the mainstream media.
Unbelievable.
100%? Are you kidding? I mean, recruitment is beating all records and, tremendous things are happening in the military, but no, 100% negative. And that's how it is on this. The media was complicit in the communist victory, and they really don't want to take credit for the bloodbath that followed.
That's frightening situation. Let me pivot to Pakistan. I definitely want to talk about Pakistan in a second, but before we do that, in about 30 seconds to a minute, can you tell us the most important lessons learned from Vietnam and our withdrawal from Vietnam 50 years ago that we should not repeat ever again?
Well, Richard Nixon wrote a great book on this after he'd had about 10 years to contemplate. And he wrote a book called No More Vietnams that he published in 1985. And there are 12 really powerful lessons, I think, in that book. But the most essential ones are that America should never commit forces unless there is a vital American interest at stake. It shouldn't do this willy-nilly. It should never engage in a limited war. If you're going to go to war, really go to war. Finish the job and finish it quickly. He says it's essential that you use overwhelming force from the beginning. He's not saying, nuke Hanoi. That's not the point. But actually fight to win, fight quickly, have clear objectives, and then get out. And America learned that lesson, I think, very well for the Persian Gulf War in 1991
Yep.
and forgot it completely in the 2000s and 2010s. And, to be fair, Iraq is a functioning democracy. It's not as nice as Indiana, but it's definitely superior to what it was. So we didn't do as badly there perhaps as the media would tell us we did. But then you have Afghanistan, which was just a complete betrayal.
Yes.
The Democrats go on for years about how Afghanistan is the good war, and then they walk off and they hand $80 billion of U.S. military equipment to the Taliban, who immediately start kicking girls out of schools, punishing literacy among women, and just bringing down a totalitarian night on the whole place. And that brings us to Pakistan.
Yep, that's a perfect pivot. It's almost like we planned it this way, Rod.
Almost.
Perfect pivot to Pakistan, and you also wrote about, or you promoted an article that discusses the possibility of the Taliban, newly empowered by the Biden administration, leaving behind tens of billions worth of weaponry, that they are expansionist, and they could very well expand to a nuclear power, a real country called Pakistan.